Okay, well, welcome to this Careers in Space panel. I'm Sergey Nersesov. I'm a faculty here in Mechanical Engineering Department at Villanova. I was asked by this enthusiastic group of students to moderate this discussion, but it looks like most of the moderating tasks are going to be fulfilled by them. So I'll just do a formal introduction. So this panel is sponsored by Villanova chapter of AIAA and ASME, as well as the CubeSat Club. So we have 6 panelists today. I'll list them all together, and then each of them will introduce themselves during their portion of presentation. So we have Carlos Blanco with Boeing. We have John Palmé, formerly with the International Launch Services. We have Tiffany Dunn with Lockheed Martin, Samantha Testa with NASA, Tom Sanzone spent most of his career at UTRC, and Gerry Gleckel with Blue Origin. And let me, since I mentioned this group of students, Samuel Thomas is a student here in the Mechanical Engineering Department. Nick Florio is ECE senior, and Talin Postian, she's from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, believe it or not, but who is very keen on space exploration. So this group of 3 students actually organized this, made sure that they gathered the panelists and that the event is properly advertised. Credit goes to them. So I think we'll go one by one to the panelists who will deliver their parts of the presentation. Nick, who do you have first?
I believe we have Gerry first. That was just a little blurb about our organizations, but yeah, if Gerry, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm an ally of Talin's in that I'm also from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. I was a math major at Villanova. I went to the Air Force ROTC program over at St. Joe's while I was at Villanova. Got my commission through the Air Force and then did a 25-year Air Force career, all in space and missile programs, including operations and program management, test, and then retired from the Air Force 2.5 years ago and joined Blue Origin out here at Cape Canaveral. So I put on some of my other academic logos from my time in, the Air Force was very, very good to me, paid for a lot of extra education. Little plug, if you're interested in the military, the Air Force is the most educated of the services. So I'll give that little plug right there. So they sent me off to school several times. So again, mostly program management in my career, but overall, technical programs, space-based programs. And so, a lot of engineering and test organizations. So next, please, next slide. So what I'm doing here today, I'm at Blue Origin. I'm the director for launch facility development, which is basically the launch complex that we're building to support our New Glenn rocket. So New Glenn is a heavy lift, large vehicle, and we're building a 305-acre launch complex out here at Cape Canaveral. First new launch complex that's been built out here in more than 25 years from the ground up. And so my team, I have about 170 people that work on my team, a mix of design engineers, technicians, construction managers, all the above. And the design engineers include electrical, mechanical, computer science, civil, et cetera. As you can imagine, building a complex like this takes all types. And so, really excited to be here and talk about what we're doing at Blue Origin, talk about what's out there in space and careers, and answer your questions. So again, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Next is Carlos Blanco.
Yes, thank you. So my name is Carlos Blanco. I am not currently in space, but I started out my 20-year career at the Boeing company in space. I started actually on the International Space Station program and had a series of different roles. Started out in our lab, helping develop our integration lab. Then I eventually moved over to our communication system where I was part of the video system as a video engineer, managing some of the equipment on the space station, as well as supporting some of the assembly flights. Then I deviated and took a tour with a Boeing development program and returned later to a systems engineering role, continuing to do mission support for the International Space Station. And then around 2011, I left Houston and the space station program and started participating in some of the other side of Boeing Aerospace, both on the commercial side as well as our defense side. One of my last roles before I took a management position at Boeing was working on the development of the new Air Force One aircraft. But I have always at heart been a space geek. I have a bachelor's degree from Florida International University, and my desire to go into engineering was dictated by the fact that I had studied all of the astronauts from the early days of the space program and was working to emulate their careers and their career path. So that's why I went into engineering, seeking out that space role, and then eventually managed to get into the space program once I graduated. While I was at Boeing, I got a master's degree in systems engineering, which has helped me out immensely in my career. And so while I'm not currently in a space role, I have kept my ties to the space program and maintain my interest in space as well. So I do have some knowledge of what Boeing is currently doing in space, and really excited about participating here with all of you.
Thank you. John Palmé.
I'm John Palmé. I grew up in Jackson, New Jersey. I'm the second of 6 kids. My dad was an early satellite design engineer back in the early 1960s, working for RCA Astro Electronics in East Windsor, New Jersey, which later became GE Astrospace. He moved over to GE Americon, which is a services company, and worked there for the last 30 or 40 years of his career. I graduated in Villanova in '88 for my bachelor's, and at night I went and got my master's through the GE Edison engineering program that I was part of at the Valley Forge facility. I had worked some summer internships at RCA, probably because I knew my dad, and then when it got bought by GE at the Valley Forge plant as well. That's important because I worked in the thermal department, and I'm currently now working with 3 or 4 of the thermal engineers that I met 30 years ago in that thermal department. So you'll bounce into the same people throughout your career if you stay in this career, because it's a very small community. My son Jeremy, some of you might know him. He graduated with the MSME in 2017. And he got his master's in 2020. So I started out at the GE Edison engineering program, which is a rotational program. Every 6 months, 8 months, you have to rotate to a different assignment within the company. And at the same time, they put you through the A, B, and C courses, which eventually leads to you getting your master's degree. And as soon as that was done, I got laid off. And I was immediately picked up by the classified department at GE, which is based in Valley Forge, but they have a large footprint in the Virginia area, and they asked me to come down to Virginia temporarily, and that was nearly 30 years ago. My career has mostly been all over the place. I've done satellite design, integration, tests, as well as launch. I've launched well over 80 spacecraft, and even operating satellites on orbit, both on the onesie twosies as well as a whole constellation. I've launched on the Russian Proton rocket. I've done about 30 or 5 or so launches on Proton. On Baikonur, done on Atlas, Delta II, Taurus, Pegasus, and the shuttle. I've launched out of the Vandenberg Air Force Base, as well as Cape Canaveral and Wallops Island, as well as Baikonur. And I've worked both classified and unclassified and NASA programs as well. I was part of the first ORBCOMM, first little LEO constellation. We don't consider Iridium to be a little LEO constellation. It was a fairly large spacecraft. That was a great experience. Since 2001, I've mostly worked for International Launch Services, which markets the Proton Heavy Lift Launch Vehicle for commercial payloads. Started out as a mission integration engineer, moved on to program director, eventually to the Deputy VP of Mission Assurance, and then the VP of Programs and Operations. But our friends at SpaceX and Blue Origin are eating our lunch there over there. So that company is gone down quite a bit in the number of people. And I left there at the end of March. And as of today, actually, I started working from Northrop Grumman on the HLS human landing system as a system architect. And I'm looking forward to hoping getting as many people into the aerospace business as possible, because we need a lot of young, good talent.
Thank you, John. By the way, it's nice to meet you. I remember your son, Jeremy. As soon as he learned that I'm originally from Russia, he told me about your trips to Baikonur.
We can talk Russian later.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
Tiffany Dunn.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Tiffany Dunn, and I currently have worked for the past 33 years at Lockheed Martin Advanced Strategic Systems in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. So kind of going off a little bit of John's experience that he spoke about earlier. My career, next slide. I started at Villanova back in 1987. I got my bachelor's in electrical engineering, and then I also went through the Edison engineering program when I was hired upon graduation for GE Aerospace, and I completed my master's in electrical engineering as well at Villanova. So that was a great program for entry-level hires to go through the A, B, and C courses, as well as get my master's degree. So I'm probably the only person who's been at the same company for her entire career, but it's changed names 3 times. I started at General Electric, Martin Marietta, GE was bought out by Martin Marietta, and then Lockheed and Martin Marietta merged to form Lockheed Martin. So as part of that transition, after working for GE in the Edison engineering program, I did rotational assignments in survivability engineering, which deals with, a lot of radiation effects in electronics. And then I also managed the engineering leadership development program, which was during the transition between GE and Martin Marietta and Lockheed Martin. We had a team of individuals who worked together to develop a leadership training program for entry-level hires within Martin Marietta and Lockheed Martin. And that was the engineering leadership development program. So I managed that program for several years. And then I also went in and worked as a communication systems engineer for quite a few years. And then after that, my entire rest of my career has been in the systems engineering role, where I've worked in both the satellite side of the business as well as the missile business. I also taught math at Bucks County Community College for a period of time. I had my minor in mathematics from Villanova, so that allowed me to get an idea of what teaching math would be like at the community college. So I did that for 6 months, and it was a lot of work trying to work a job and teach. So I just went back to working for Lockheed Martin at that time. In my systems engineering role, what we do and what I've done in my career, I've done a lot of analysis work. I've done a lot of requirements development work, model-based systems engineering. I worked on telemetry systems. I also worked on Landsat 7 with the NASA. It was a satellite program. And then we did a lot of IR&D development work. The industries that I've worked with, mainly the Air Force, NASA, we also deal with Sandia and Honeywell on a lot of the work that we've done in my systems engineering role. And I've also worked with a lot of mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, testing engineers, and computer science people as a systems engineer with Lockheed Martin. Thank you, and I'm excited to be here. Haven't done this in a long time.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sam Testa. I graduated Villanova as a mechanical engineering major in 2016, and then got my master's degree also from Villanova in 2017. I did the 5-year master's program through them. I started working at NASA when I was a sophomore at Villanova. I was an intern in software and quickly found out that that wasn't my calling. So I came back and returned the next summer as a mechanical design engineering intern, which led to a full-time job when I graduated in 2016, where I came down here and started working full-time while I finished my master's through Villanova's online program, which was great because it allowed me to do both. So if anyone ever asks you, you can do both, but it's certainly not easy. Next slide, please. So I've been with NASA for 5 years now, going on 6 come 2021. I've also been in my career just only ever at NASA, so I've been stuck in the public sector. But right now I am a lead design engineer. I work for the Commercial Crew Program as the Astronaut Centrifuge Training LDE with SpaceX and Boeing. Some of you may have seen the launch yesterday, and we're coming up on docking tonight at 11 o'clock. So it's been a really exciting week for all of us down here at the Kennedy Space Center. Should have said that's where I work down here. I also am the LDE for NASA's EGS program, which is Exploration Ground Systems for the SLS rocket emergency egress system. And that is basically a system that if we have a bad day on the launch pad, it allows the astronauts to escape both the rocket and the tower to get away and hopefully keep them safe from any mishaps that could be happening. I'm also the LD on the Orion program for mechanical ground system support equipment. So any of the equipment that the Orion capsule needs to be processed prior to launch or post splashdown, I help manage the mechanical side of that. I should have stated earlier, the Astronaut Centrifuge Training Program gives the crew a chance to experience what launch and reentry feels like before their day of launch. So the crew that you saw fly yesterday and the crew from DM Mission 2 all practiced what launch and reentry would feel like through this program. So it's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, Sam. Tom Sanzone.
Hi, I want to start by thanking Nick and Colleen and Sam for organizing the event. They've done an amazing job. I also want to mention that the prior Sam that you just heard from, I had the honor of mentoring part of her time at Villanova. So I'm very proud of her accomplishments and what's to come for her. Tiffany, it is very rare to hear somebody in aerospace that's worked for one company their whole career. But that's what I did as well. I worked for the Hamilton Standard Division. Again, it changed names multiple times, but for the most of my career, it was called Hamilton Standard. It was under United Technologies Corporation, and I worked 43 years for them, all at the Johnson Space Center. So one company in one location is unheard of in the aerospace world, and I don't think it'll ever happen again. After I retired, I spent about 8 years doing some consulting, mostly public relations type stuff for a company called MRI Technologies in Houston. And then I officially turned my badge in just over a year ago. What got me to Houston on a 1-year assignment, by the way, to John's point, was the company was headquartered in Connecticut. I grew up in Connecticut. And I was supposed to go to work at Boeing as a field rep because it's primarily an aerospace company, not a space company, Hamilton Standard. Now it's called, well, it's had so many name changes. I want to go through it. It's Collins Aerospace now. But they made the backpack that was worn on the moon. It's called the Portable Life Support System. And so I was sent down to Houston on a 1-year assignment in July of 1968, 1 year before we landed on the moon. And I was involved with testing the life support systems, astronaut training, preparation for flight, all the flight support and mission control, et cetera, et cetera. In the early 80s, I became the Houston office engineering manager. And we were the prime contractor for the Space Shuttle Extravehicular Mobility Unit, which is really the spacesuit and life support system combined. That's the same unit that is still being used by Americans for spacewalks from the space station. It was designed in 1977. It's had a few mods since then, but it's been a great system. In 1986, I became the general manager for the Houston office of United Technologies, and we had a workforce of about 250 or so at the Johnson Space Center. And then after I retired, as I mentioned, I went to work for MRI Consulting. I'm going to skip over the recognitions, other than to say I know one of the sponsors here is AIAA, and I'm an AIAA member for 40 years. And those recognitions come more from old age than from performance. I can tell you, if you're around long enough, you'll get some awards. So you can go to the next slide. I'm often asked, well, what was the highlight of your career? And not totally tongue in cheek, I say, well, the highlight of my career occurred a year after I graduated from Villanova when I was 22 years old. And it was called Apollo 11. And because my company made the life support system that they wore on the moon, and I was involved with the astronaut training. The first crew I ever got to train was the Apollo 11 crew. So we trained them in a variety of locations, but vacuum chambers are one of the places where we do the training with the actual hardware that they'll use when they go up there. So when I look at this slide, I'm reminded of those were the days, my friend, we thought they'd never end. So the picture in the lower right has a guy circled. That's me. It's circled because everybody says to me, well, which one is you? And then you see Neil in the upper left, and then the upper right in his spacesuit. And then the photo in the lower left was taken, obviously, after we were both primarily done with our careers, but it was at an event in Houston, a big black tie event. So although I joke about that was the highlight of my career, I had many other highlights over a great 5-decade career. So I'm more the historian on the panel versus the what's going on with space right now, but I look forward to participating.
Thank you. So I guess we're going to the questions part of it. So our students, Nick and Talene, are going to ask questions, our panelists, and then we'll open the floor to the questions from the students. Nick, Talene.
Alrighty, awesome. Also, just a note, not all the panelists have to answer every single question. Some might be targeted more for certain panelists and others, and you'll kind of see which questions those are. But let's get started with how did you get involved in space?
Well, since I'm the one who was involved first in space on the panel, I'll give you a quick answer. My involvement with space was pure serendipity. I was not a space nut like 99% of the people here and zooming in. As I mentioned earlier, I was actually supposed to go to work at Boeing in Seattle for United Technologies as a field rep. And the day I showed up for work on May 27th, 2 weeks after I graduated from Villanova, the guy who met me in the lobby was someone I had met when I was interviewed in February. And he said, since you were here, I've been promoted to be the service manager for space. And you're going to work for me. You're not going to work for the other guy who interviewed you. And field service reps are like military. You know, you go where they send you for a year or 2 or 3, and then you get moved someplace. So I got sent to Houston. I was not enamored with going to Houston. Hot summers, to say the least. And it took me about 2 weeks to get totally hooked. And then they tried to get me to go back to Connecticut, and I said, no way. And I never left. I mean, I turned down vice president roles and things like that just because I loved working at NASA so much. So that's how I got involved, pure serendipity.
I was the exact opposite. I've always been a space nerd Space is always what I've wanted to do, which is, 90% of the reason why I tracked Tom down when I found out what he did as a Villanova grad, to find a way to talk him into becoming my mentor, because it's always what I wanted to do, specifically working at NASA. So this was always something I wanted to do, and that's how I got into it, is just tracking it down and doing my best to get there.
For me, I was kind of born into it. My father was in the business already, and I was probably 6 or 7 years old when he took me to my first launch down in at the Cape. So, been a lifelong passion for me as well.
If nobody else has anything to say about getting involved with space, let's move on to our next question. And this is to the whole panel as well. What surprised you most about your day-to-day work after you started your career?
I think for me, when I got my job as the Edison Engineering program with GE, going through like the different rotations, I always thought, like, coming out of Villanova, I wanted to go into digital signal processing, and that was kind of my focus at Villanova. And when I went to these rotational assignments, it kind of opened up a whole variety of engineering careers that I could pursue. And I ended up working in an area, survivability engineering, which for someone in college wasn't even something I knew about, but I found I liked something a little different than what I pursued in college. So that was kind of different for me.
Lean, if nobody else has anything, my biggest surprise was how young everyone was when I first went to work at NASA. And people are blown away by this, but the average age of a flight controller when we landed on the moon was 26. And because there were so many young people, they were given a lot of responsibility, which they all stepped up to, and authority. So that was by far my biggest surprise.
I can counteract that now. I work with a very few number of young people at the agency now. It's growing because we're doing more these days, but one of my surprises, I wouldn't say the biggest, but one of my surprises was that there were really only a handful of young people at the agency when I started.
Yeah, and Sam, to your point, when I started, space was so new. NASA had only been formed less than 10 years before. That graybeards, as we call them, were very few. If you were 30 years old, you were like an experienced veteran. And the people who are of the age that you deal with now, most of the time, they didn't have any more knowledge about space than the young people did. So yeah, it's changed for sure. It's changed.
Well, it's cool because you see that now at SpaceX and places like Blue Origin, these companies that are building up and becoming, what they're eventually going to be for the rest of what they are. And you see the age, drop a little bit more there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I know that there's having spent 25 years in the military, the government side tends to skew older, and now being at Blue Origin, the commercial side tends to skew younger. And I think it correlates to the speed at which things happen in those organizations where, the government has to self-insure their projects. They don't have investors and billionaires that own the companies. It's taxpayer dollars, and so NASA and the Air Force and other government organizations tend to be more careful and take their time with things, whereas the young, brash, new commercial space companies, they're fast and easy with other people's dollars, but as a result, they get progress faster. So it's kind of I know. There's pros and cons to both. Again, I'll tell you, there's pros and cons to both. There's systems like GPS, which was, is a military procured and run system. Without it, the world would not be what it is. And yet, so those types of systems have to be super careful, and yet we can take a lot more risk with some of the things we're doing here at Blue and down the street at SpaceX.
Awesome. Yeah, it's definitely, you're actually answering some questions we have a little bit later on about the differences between private and public, but we'll get to that. So the next question, I know some of you have kind of outlined it in your kind of bio slides, but just, I guess, a little bit of an emphasis. How much has your career trajectory changed since you graduated? Like, what were your plans before working at your current job? Like, if you have any kind of like end goals. I know, Sam, you said, I don't know if you said it on this, I was watching your YouTube feature that Villanova Engineering posted, and you said something about an astronaut maybe. So, I was just wondering, I guess, if you've had a bumpy road, any of you, or was it really just a straight direct path to space? I know some have answered, but just to kind of emphasize that part.
So you're right, Nick. Being an astronaut is one of my end goals. It's kind of always been my end goal going through this job. And it's not the sole reason I wanted to work at NASA, but it was a big one. And I did apply to the astronaut program for the last call. So it's on pause right now with COVID. We'll find out in spring when it restarts. But I've never had, there's not really one path to getting there. I always I wanted to be some type of an engineer, and eventually it, became clear mechanical was the right path for me. I knew I always wanted to work at NASA, but I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do. And then, design engineering, actually, I discovered at Villanova that I really loved through the Formula SAE team there. And then I became a design engineer at the agency, and I kind of took the route of having a general idea of some of the goals I wanted to do kind of on my bucket list for work. One of the things was wanting to train astronauts and be able to work with, different space centers and be able to travel, internationally for work. A lot of which I've been able to do. I haven't been able to travel internationally yet, but part of the reason that I think I've been able to keep to the path that I was so interested in is because of some really good advice I was given by the center director, actually, Bob Cabana. He said, if you're ever given an opportunity or you're asked to do something, try to say yes if it's new to you, because you never know where it's going to lead you. And it could be somewhere you don't expect. And as a design engineer, my peers knew I wanted to be an astronaut eventually. They had a decent idea of some of the goals that I was interested in. And I was asked to work on spacesuit development for the commercial crew program, which actually sounded like a really boring job when we got into the description of it, because the spacesuits were already largely developed. So it sounded like it was just going to be a bunch of paperwork, like we were just going to be signing papers and sitting in meetings. And it turned out that that was not all the job entailed. I got to do a lot of traveling to see the suits and see the testing, and I started to get to interact with the crew. And then eventually it led to training astronauts at the centrifuge program. So luckily I've been able to kind of keep my goals in sight, but a lot of it was a little bit of luck involved. So.
Yeah, I agree. Be flexible. And the first 5-10 years of my career, I kept telling everyone there's no way I wanted to do anything other than become a chief engineer. And they're like, well, you should go into program management. I said, no, I never want to do that, which means I did that for the last 20 years, of course, because it's just a tough a problem as being a chief engineer is solving engineering problems, solving program management problems are almost exactly the same thing. So just as Sam said, don't say no to something, even though it doesn't sound interesting to you. You never know where it's going to lead.
Yeah, for me, it was similar. This is Carlos. And I think for me, I'm probably the one with the biggest change. I started out in space and I'm no longer in space. So I think that was the biggest change and surprise. I had always intended for my career to stay in space. When I was in Houston on the space station, I worked on our proposal for what was called the Crew Exploration Vehicle, which eventually Lockheed won and became Orion. And it was my intention to stay on some other program. And then eventually when the shuttle program went away and they started downsizing the workforce for Boeing in Houston, it kind of became necessary to go somewhere else. So that's where that flexibility part helped me and allowed me to remain at Boeing for the length of my career. But it did force me to have to give up the space stuff, at least for now. I'm hoping to one day get back.
Awesome.
Building off that question a little bit, I wanted to ask more of a general question that we've sort of touched on a little bit. How has the industry changed since you graduated? One of the great things about our panel that we have compiled here is that we have such a good range of people where you are in your careers, either starting out or having seen the whole cusp of it. So I wanted to ask sort of everyone, what types of projects are available right now, and then maybe in the future, and basically how has it changed as time gone on?
I think for me, the biggest thing that has changed are the technical tools and the ability of especially the students coming out of college, how sharp they are with the tools and computers. And I mean, back when I first started, I mean, we were working with VAX computers and Fortran, and now it's just a whole different trajectory in terms of the tools and the skills of all the young engineers coming out of school. I mean, they blow me away in their abilities with navigating, all the new software tools that we use for doing analysis or simulations or analyzing stresses and things like that. So that's been the biggest, I think, jump for me, is seeing that.
I think for me,
Colleen, as the bookend on the other side, the slide that was put up that showed me with the circle around my head, and there were 4 of us at a table, and it was in one of the back rooms in Mission Control. It was while the crew was on the moon, and what we're doing is we are reading telemetry data that's coming down onto CRTs, TV screens in digital form, and we are hand plotting the data on 11 by 17 graph paper. So if you want to know how much the industry's changed in 51 years, that tells you more than anything.
Yeah, for me, I think there's 2 big changes. Like back in the 80s and 90s, there was a huge amount of consolidation within in the aerospace business. Many smaller ones either got bought up or got kind of closed out. And it sort of settled into about 4 or 5 different firms for probably the bulk of the 90s and 2000s. But then all of a sudden, SpaceX really got their traction underneath them, and then new space became, and so it's just exploding once again. And I think that's a really exciting time to see that industry explode in so many different directions at one time. It's just, it's an amazing time in the industry.
I gotta agree with you, John. I may be biased, but I think that this is one of the best times to get into the space industry because there are just so many companies popping up covering so many aspects of it. You have companies like, Blue and SpaceX and Boeing who are all starting to launch again and bringing up new rockets and vehicles like that. But, NASA's also planning to go to the moon and eventually Mars. And with the Artemis program, we're looking at all kinds of other companies building, human landing systems for the moon and NASA's Gateway program, which will be like an ISS around the moon. Then we're going to be building habitats, which we have all private companies involved in. NASA is helping, but we're looking at private companies to be, doing some of the major builds on these pieces of hardware. And so there's companies all over the place that are popping up, and it's just really fun to be a part of because it's just so diverse.
And one thing I would say is back when, Tiffany and I and Tom were, you got out and you went to work for a company for 30, 40 years and retire with a pension. Now you can go out, work for a company. If it folds in 3 years, you can go get picked up by someone else the next week. It's an amazing opportunity. You can just do whatever you want with very little fear that you're going to be unemployed in 6 months. I mean, you may lose the company may go under, but there'll be another one to pick you up immediately.
Make a quick comment that a couple of years ago, I was involved with an economic development foundation here in Houston. And this is before we started flying again from the US. And a lot of people thought that NASA had closed after the shuttle program ended. I mean, that was the mindset. I'd see people and they'd say, I thought NASA closed. And it was because we weren't launching from the United States. We were actually launching, but from Kazakhstan, but that didn't resonate with Americans. And so it was kind of a down feeling. And one of the Boeing reps said, there is more space development going on right now in the United States than in its history. And what you're starting to see now is the fruition of that development that was going on a few years ago that people had very little understanding of and thought everything had come to an end. And as you can tell, it's really just the beginning. It's a beginning of a new age. So if you're young, this is the time to get involved.
The statistic I heard today, Tom, was with yesterday's launch, SpaceX has launched more astronauts from U.S. soil than the entire Mercury program did, and he did it in 6 months.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I hadn't thought of it.
Yeah, and there's a big focus on the crewed aspect of space today, but there's so much work to be done ahead of that with landing systems and habitats and infrastructure that needs to go either into these orbits or onto the moon or onto Mars. Way stations, midpoints en route, et cetera. And so, that same stuff that was being done in the 50s and early 60s before the manned programs of that era is also being done now today. So there's a lot of opportunities, for civil engineers and structural engineers. It's not just about building here on Earth, but building those lunar habitats and in orbit habitats as well. And so, like as Sam said, there's a lot of these small startup companies that are partnering with some of the big ones, or getting NASA sponsorship, et cetera. And so there is just a ton of opportunity out here.
I think there's also a misconception that to work at NASA, you have to be an engineer. And that's not the case. I mean, they have nutritionists, they have psychologists, they have MD, they have everything you could conceive. So there's an opportunity for you. If you're from arts and sciences, I can guarantee you there's opportunities for you. You don't have to be an engineer.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Tom. I mean, I work with accountants and lawyers, on certain aspects of my projects. So, yeah, I mean, there are photographers. We have professional photographers out here who really get to have fun on days like yesterday where we had launches, and we have public affairs representatives that we get to work with when we do media events. I mean, you can do any job or have any major in college and find a place to work in the space industry if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been at Blue for 2.5 years, and when I got here, it was you were either an aerospace engineer or you weren't hired. And they would just look around and say, "Oh, we need a chief financial officer. Oh, you're good with math. You go be the CFO. Oh, you go be the." And then they quickly realized over time that that's not sustainable, and they started hiring specialists in those roles. Financial. CPAs and accountants and contracting officers and like you said, IT specialists and everything else, instead of just assigning the closest aerospace engineer to that role. So yeah, absolutely agree with you that there's opportunities for everybody.
Nick?
All righty, I guess we'll get into our next. I thought maybe Carlos wanted to speak, so I didn't know. Carlos, I saw your mic on, so I didn't know if you wanted to maybe add something to that.
I think most of the good stuff has already been taken out. I was going to say, from my perspective, when I started in Houston in 2000, the idea of commercial companies participating in space other than building hardware for NASA for the government to operate and use was, just not something you ever brought up. And if anybody said it, it was looked at as, you've been getting into some of the funky water and you probably need to go home and get some rest. And now here we are, and we have an entire burgeoning commercial industry, and not just Boeing's, Blue Origin, SpaceX, Axiom, and a bunch of others are starting to get in on the and 20 years, so it's huge. How we used to think about space. The space used to be the world of governments only. From that paradigm,
Carlos, you're breaking up a little bit right there, but I think we got most of what you were going to say.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe the satellite was a little too far at this point. So let's get into the next question, which is, I think it's pretty interesting. What project are you all most proud of? There's a lot of impressive projects out there. There's a lot of, so try and pick one, and, kind of don't be humble about it, brag.
Yes, the project I'm most proud of, I worked on a hypersonics program. It was called the Falcon program, HTV2, and I did the telemetry system for the program. And I got to take it from design, integration and test while they build up the vehicle and launch the vehicle. And so seeing the whole design, test, flight process was actually pretty cool. And I think that, a lot of times in industry, you don't get to stay on a program for that duration of time so that you can see it from, beginning to end. And so I think that's the project that stands out to me.
I guess I can.
Nick, I know you're looking for one, but I'm going to give you an A and a B. Obviously, Apollo 11 and, working with the crew in the first landing on the moon and being part of a team of 400,000 people is the thing that gets the most recognition. But I think the thing I'm most proud of, I always felt a little bit guilty in that people had been developing this hardware for years and years. And then I graduate from Villanova, and 10 months later, I'm training the crew. I felt like somebody gave me a J. Wright basketball uniform and said, go out on the floor, when I hadn't even been to a practice. So I think the program I'm most proud of is the development of the space shuttle extravehicular mobility and spacesuit and life support system, because that's one that I was involved with from the very beginning, from the proposal all the way through, working with astronauts and developing it, and then seeing it be used, seeing it be extremely successful. And we often say the EMU is not a large garment, it's a small spacecraft. So it was also extremely fun and rewarding to be able to work with a team that was relatively small, and you knew almost everybody. You knew the people at the Cape, you knew the people on mission control, you knew all the trainers, you knew the developers, the technicians, the doctors, etc. So that was extremely rewarding. And as I said earlier, it's still being used on the space station.
So Tom, they still say that it's a small spacesuit or a small spaceship and not a garment.
Yeah. It's true. It's true.
It is. It absolutely is. The project I'm most excited about and most proud of so far is definitely the astronaut training program for the centrifuge. We work with the Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, where they have our centrifuge. And I was able to lead a team of engineers here at the Kennedy Space Center to design, build, and then test the panels that we use inside the centrifuge that the astronauts interact with while they're under G-loading, which represent SpaceX and Boeing's panels. And I've also been able to be a test subject on the project. So I've been able to train the way the crew trains, and we go in and make sure that everything they're going to be experiencing is as realistic as we can make it before we get them suited up and jumping in. So that's definitely by far been my most favorite project. Not only because I get to ride the centrifuge too, but we get to interact with the crew, all the crews who will eventually be flying. So it's a really good one.
I think the one I'm most proud of is the one I'm currently working on and not quite done with yet. But, you know, I joined Blue Origin from the Air Force basically because it continues to be something that's bigger than myself. And, you know, Jeff Bezos is our sole founder, sole contributor, sole financier. And he's got a multi-generational vision with this, you know, and it's not about market share and things like that. It's about, you know, our vision is millions of people living and working in space. And so this launch pad that we're building out here for the new Glenn is the path to execute that vision. And you know, kind of like Tiffany and Tom both talked about projects that you're there from the beginning through the end. You know, that's where I'll be with this launch pad. When I got here, it was dirt. They were doing some foundational work, but mostly just drilling concrete piles into the ground. And now, you know, if you're anywhere on the Space Coast, you can see our 571-foot lightning towers and 350-foot water tower. That's the thing you see when you look north from the beaches of the Space Coast. And so, you know, someday we'll be putting those millions of people up in space, and you know, I'll be able to say I was part of the infrastructure to get them there. So that's it for me so far.
Moving on to something that's very relevant to all of us right now, sort of the reason we're on Zoom, how has COVID affected the work that you do?
For me, COVID hasn't really affected it a ton because a lot of my work is classified. And so I need to be in work to work those tasks. So I pretty much go into work day in and day out, although my work environment has changed in terms of making sure everything's clean. They have cleaning supplies everywhere. We have cleaning people that clean our area. But as far as, you know, the day-to-day activities, I mean, we still use Skype. We use a lot of tools like Zoom. We use Skype to, you know, interact and hold meetings. So that's really all that has really been impacted in my work environment.
I've got kind of a two-parter. So my team, some of my team are affected and some are not. I mean, so our design engineers are able to take their laptops and work from home successfully without much impact. But the construction side of it on the launch pad, obviously you can't do that from home. So, you know, we have, at our peak, we had 500 construction workers a day on site there. And our construction company and our teams were kind of, you know, we did the temperature scans, mandatory masks, mandatory 6-foot separation, kind of, you know, we got ahead of it before the state required it, before the Air Force required it from working on the base. And that really has kept our impacts down. We've had a couple small outbreaks where, you know, and then the quarantining of the immediate folks around them, you know, we're able to fill in and do other work while that team is quarantined for 10 days. So it hasn't impacted us overall, but at the micro scale, it has. And then the other thing is, like, as a manager, I find it a little bit harder, you know, from a morale and leadership standpoint. You know, I'm used to having a monthly all-call with everybody and get in the conference room and we talk about status and progress and give announcements, and then we usually go for a couple beers afterward, you know, at the local at the local watering hole. And so that's not able to do that anymore. And so you know, it's harder to feel connected as a team, even though we have online meetings and online tools. You know, the in-person thing, you know, it's like I said, I think it hurts the ability to feel connected as a team. And so kind of a morale and culture aspect to it that doesn't get a lot of attention. But that's my impact.
That's a good point, Gerry, because we're feeling it too over here. I'm sure everyone's feeling it. Even, even you guys as students at Villanova, I'm sure you guys have an aspect of that. For us, most of the agency is teleworking, like you said, unless we can't, where you have to be on center. I get to telework unless, or they call it remote work, unless it's crew related. We can't do training virtually. They have to be there and we have to be there to support. So we put the crew, especially the assigned crew, in like a hyper quarantine bubble. We fly them out of Johnson on a private jet. They have to get tested. Everyone with them on that jet has to get tested before they get on. The crew who are part of the support team who go up early, we are basically, in our hotels, and we can go out to various specific places together. But we don't get to interact with the crew as closely. They're kind of kept behind glass. We're actually on completely different levels in the building at Wright-Patterson where we're training them. So for them, it's been a little bit tougher because we have to keep them super extra safe. Sending crew to the International Space Station, if somebody has something, they will absolutely all get it, most likely, especially with something like COVID that's so contagious, just because they're in a tin can. So we do absolutely everything we can to keep them safe, and this crew especially has been great with that. So other than that, it's just been working from home and wearing masks and washing your hands.
Awesome. Yeah, it's kind of, I'm actually a grad student at Villanova now. I graduated this past May, so I'm class of 2020, and it feels weird to be an alumni, but comparing really just this year with all virtual and the last 4 years really of being in person on campus, it's definitely a crazy transition. So I can only imagine how it affects in industry. So we have 2 questions left. I know some people are popping out already, but we will have a chance to have the audience ask a few questions. We just want to get through these last 2 because they're pretty loaded, and I think definitely something to consider for our younger students in the audience. So next question is kind of a 2-part kind of comparison. The first one, so Gerry, you're in the private sector, obviously with Blue Origin. I know you mentioned a little bit of this before, along with a few other panelists. But how really, and anyone can answer, but I know Gerry kind of mentioned it before, how does private and public really differ? And, do they work together? Obviously with some of the new programs, we're seeing some collaboration. So I guess that's one part of it. And then also I know Carlos, transitioning from space and then into general aerospace, how is space different from, general aerospace? So 2-part question. So first off, I guess private versus public.
I made a couple comments before. I'll just point out one other thing. But so I was actually in the Air Force stationed here at the Cape in 2010 when SpaceX was doing their crew demo missions, their first launches of Falcon 9 here. And I remember the attitudes of, I think Carlos made the comment when he was at NASA, the attitudes were, what are they doing? They're putting everybody at risk. They don't have the same level of mission assurance and safety and fault tolerance and everything else that we require in the government. And there was a skepticism and almost a reluctance, to partner with it. Well, we'll never put a government payload on that, Well, now here we are, a couple of days removed from 4 NASA astronauts, or 3 NASA and 1 JAXA astronauts on there. And, so it has evolved over the last 10 years. And now, from my perspective at Blue, NASA is one of our best partners and, one of the ones that we're really seeking to continue the relationship with on the human lander system and Artemis and other future projects like that. But there's been a learning back and forth. The government kind of learned to give up a little bit on that tension, and industry learned to also respond and provide more of it and do more documentation and things like that. So I think it's a good partnership at this point, though.
I can agree with that. We're definitely finding that good balance of the agency learning from the private industry and you know, the private industry learning from the agency. You guys are getting us to move faster, which is amazing, because otherwise we tend to move a little bit slowly. And you know, we're making sure that everything's super safe in training some of these smaller companies. Not, you know, Blue's huge, but some of the, especially the smaller companies that are popping up that haven't necessarily been in space before and are learning. You know, we have a good history there, so it's been a really good give and take, and it's only getting better.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. So I guess Carlos, and I guess anyone who kind of had the aerospace to space transition or back and forth, kind of, if you could kind of speak to that. You know, is there really a big difference? I know Tiffany also, there's space, a little bit of aerospace at Lockheed too. You know, is there a real big transition? You know, is there, you know, is it easy to kind of transition between the two?
Yeah, so definitely there is a difference between, you know, kind of general aviation, aerospace, and space, especially when I transitioned from Houston and the International Space Station program over to Boeing and the commercial side of the business. For one of the biggest differences is the volume of production and the type of controls that you have to put around when you have a higher volume of production. I mean, in space, especially for the space station, a lot of the equipment that I dealt with when I was on that program, we ever only built like maybe 4 units plus a half-baked engineering model that we used in the lab to simulate. And that was all that had ever been built of that piece of hardware. Whereas if you take a commercial airliner, you know, you're making hundreds and hundreds of commercial airliners. So you have to have a different control for the production system. Also the environmental controls that you need for space, right? When you're dealing in low Earth orbit with ionizing radiation, atomic oxygen, and other types of environments that you might find, especially if you're on the outside of the spacecraft, your environmental requirements are going to be significantly different than you would find inside the cabin of an airliner. Even the cabin of an airliner is way different than the cabin of the International Space Station for the crew in terms of, you know, control of the airflow and things of that nature. The transition was a little bit difficult for me just because my primary role had been for many years systems engineering, and there's a lot more systems engineering up here in the Puget Sound and the Seattle area. So I was finding a hard time getting picked up, you know, trying to parlay my space experience into commercial aviation. The general attitude with a lot of the hiring managers was, you don't know the stuff that we need you to know about aviation, about the FAA, and about certification. You know a lot about the space stuff, which is great, but we don't need that. So it was a little bit different, but you know, at the core of it, it's still all aerospace. So it's still a very unique business within the world of engineering compared to many of the other industries you might find, like automotive or anything like that.
And Tiffany, I think you're also going
Nick, yeah, I may be a bad one to answer this because I never worked in pure aerospace, only space, but I worked in a primarily aerospace company. So like I dealt a lot with our president and you know, our biggest customer, the company's biggest customer was Boeing by far, because they make lots and lots of stuff for airplanes. And the business model is so different between space and aerospace. It's like night and day. I'm just talking the business model. You know, in aerospace, when you develop something for an airplane, you do it on your own nickel, and you have a business plan that starts paying you back after they start flying airplanes, which could be 10 years later. So there's a phenomenal upfront investment, where most space investment is from the government. You know, the government's paying you upfront. Even SpaceX gets most of their money from the government. You know, they get most of their funding from NASA. So it's very, very different business models.
Yeah, they like to say space is where you make a small pile of money out of a very large pile of money.
Yes. And one of the problems of a government contractor, I'm not sure how it is today, but NASA tends to think that, you know, double-digit fees are like, oh my gosh, you know, we couldn't possibly pay you that much in fees, you know, because most of these contracts that I dealt with were cost plus award fee and things like that. Whereas in the commercial world, if you're not in high double, you know, in the teens, they'll drop you. The company will say, well, just sell this off because we've got to make 20% profit. Now, you know, when I went through my background, I spent the last half of my career as a general manager. First half of my career, I never worried about money. I was an engineer. I just, you know, did my stuff, trained the crew. It was so much fun. Then you get into the business side, and it is a totally different world, particularly because if you don't stay in business, there is no space side. and sometimes it's just hanging on to stay in business during these, you know, during these lulls in funding or administrations, you know, political things that go on. Yeah, the two are very different for sure.
Well, I can tell you, Tom, we're certainly not writing contracts for double digits anymore. We're talking like 6 or 7 digits these days.
Yeah, I know. Well, I say that because my company president had a goal from the corporation. I won't give you the number, but it was in the high teens. That's what he needed to meet his goals, his return on sales. We were significantly less than half of that. And so, you know, once you get to that level, they say, well, why would I invest with you? Why would I keep you in my portfolio? You're dragging me down. And the best that we could come up with, and it was enough, was cash flow. So companies worry about cash flow. The government pays on time. That's not all companies pay on time. So I had a vice president that I worked under who sold the president on us bidding on a particular contract by comparing it to a stock portfolio. He said, I have some high risk investments that pay high and I have some low risk investments that pay low. This is the low risk investment that allows me to maintain the cash flow that I need for all of my business. So, you know, you sell what you have to sell to stay in business. And that's what we saw. Because most people that work at NASA, and I'll put myself in that box, we're so passionate about putting people in space, we don't like thinking about the business side of things, you know? To see people you know and have talked to or are friends of yours launching to go into space, there's no amount of money that can pay you for that kind of feedback. But once you get into the business world, and like we were like 5% of our company was space, 95% of it was aerospace. And they talk a lot more about the business side than the highs of putting people on airplanes. So we're kind of spoiled, I guess is what I'm saying.
Awesome, yeah, and I think Tiffany had wanted to also mention something. I saw the mic popping off for that.
Real quick, I mean, I think the biggest thing, and Carlos mentioned it earlier, where the difference between the two is kind of the environmental considerations that you have to take into account, but you're still applying like the same like engineering principles and analyses, you know, to, you know, analyze those environments for your product. And, you know, I think there's a lot of complementary things between the two.
To your point, Tiffany, there's not physics and math for aerospace and physics and math for space. They're the same.
It's all the same.
Okay, one last question before we hand it over to the general questions from the whole audience. What are employers looking for in newly graduated and current undergraduate students? Y'all knew this question was coming. We're a bunch of college students. Tell us what you're looking for.
I'll start. I'm an active hirer currently and been doing it for the last couple of years. So I can tell you that from a resume standpoint, you know, it's GPA and major and applicability, but also it's the extracurriculars that are applicable to that job or that career field. So, you know, are you in the robotics club? Do you like to, in your spare time, you like to web design or program things if you're in computer science or software? You know, so I like to, you know, I CAD modeled my deck and then, you know, built it off the back of my house, you know, like things like that kind of stand out to us as we're looking at, because again, new grads and undergrads, you know, you can only get so much out of a GPA and a school name. So those extracurriculars that are applicable are really helpful. And then the interview process, you know, it's about enthusiasm. It's about, you know, eye contact and communication skills and things like that that are gonna, you want me to want to work with you. You want me to put you on my team. And, you know, we spend, you know, 8, 10, 12 hours a day together. We need to like each other. And so, you know, you need to be likable and you need to be personable. You know, and so you want to demonstrate that, whether it's on the phone interview or the Skype interview or the in-person interview. So that's my advice.
Yeah, I agree with Gerry completely. I've been doing hiring the last couple of years for Boeing as well, and everything that you just said completely applies. And there's oftentimes there's be that one candidate that's like the perfect candidate. They know the things that you want them to know. They've actually worked in that particular field, whether it's through internships or other co-ops or things like that. And they just have everything that you need. You can just put them right into work on day one. And but the vast majority of students are not quite in that category. And you can have students that don't necessarily have all of the things that you're necessarily looking for, but they have the enthusiasm, they have the energy, they have the drive, and they make themselves memorable. They're personable. They either make you laugh or there's something about them that you remember, and you make a note on their resume about, yeah, that was the kid who had the funny tie, or, you know, made that joke about this other thing. And they have the leadership skills and they have participated in the extracurriculars, and you know that you can take that enthusiasm, take that energy, take that drive and train them up once you bring them into your team, and they're going to do absolutely amazing work for you. So a lot of times, and I've told this to students that I mentor, it doesn't even matter whether you know the stuff that they need you to know. It's all of these other personality things that are even more important, because that means you're going to be an effective member of the team and you're going to be successful no matter where we integrate you.
Can I ask you a follow-up question to this? A non-technical minor, when you look at the resume and someone got a minor in business, is that a turn-off for you? Is that an indication that maybe this person lacks of focus, or opposite, just diversity of skills?
No, the exact opposite. You know, I see somebody with a minor, especially if it's not an adjacent one to engineering, that is like pure gold for me, because there's somebody who's got a diverse background that will understand more than just one section of the projects you're putting them on. They'll understand things like a cost-benefit analysis, you know, of what's going to occur if we go down this one path. So we love to see people with a diverse undergraduate backgrounds, certainly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, design engineers need to design with cost and schedule in mind, you know. And so if they don't understand the financial system, they can't use some of the other tools that are outside the engineering world. They're less valuable. So if you have a minor that's applicable in that way, I agree with John. That's certainly a positive.
Or sometimes it may not even be a minor. It could also be participation in extracurriculars that are beyond the standard engineering ones. I pay a lot of attention to engineers who demonstrate a skill in communication, the ability to take a very complex engineering topic and distill it such that anybody can understand it is pure gold. I mean, that when you have to go make presentations to leadership to sell a project, you need to be able to condense things down to something that's understandable. I usually tell incoming students or engineers that I mentor, be able to explain it as if you're talking to your grandma. If you can explain it to grandma, you can explain it to anybody.
Thank you.
I think having a business background is also, very important. I mean, we do a lot of work where we submit proposals and, you're doing cost estimating and gathering, information on cost and schedule. And I mean, having a business background, I think makes you that much more valuable to the team, particularly in a proposal environment.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to the general questions now. So I would like everyone at this time, if you have a question for our panel, please put it in the general chat.
Colleen, while you're waiting, this is Tom Sanzone. I wanted to make a quick comment, not on how to get your job, but how to keep your job. I served on the board of directors of the Villanova Alumni Association from 2011 to 17, and I was the representative to the College of Engineering, so I became quite close friends with Dr. Gabriel. He invited me to sit in on his advisory panel one time when I was on campus. And there was a member of the panel, member of his advisory panel, that said something I've never forgotten. He said, "We hire for skills, but we retain for values." So think about that for after you get your job, because those values are really important. And the values that you get at Villanova are unmatched, in my opinion. I would hire Villanova people unseen, uninterviewed. Just
If you're not getting too many questions, Tiffany, I've heard about the leadership development program. So many people speak really highly about that. Even maybe just talking about what you can do and what that can benefit you, because I know so many companies have them. That'd be, as a student, that was something I was really interested in. So.
Sure, I can, since I was actually kind of instrumental in helping Lockheed Martin develop the leadership development programs. I mean, they have leadership development programs in all areas. They have them in manufacturing, they have them in business, they also have them in engineering, and also computer science. And basically what it is, originally it was an entry-level position. You would get into the engineering leadership development program. They've kind of changed it over the last 10 years. And now it's like those students who have 1 to 2 years of work experience, and they'd like you to get that work experience first before going into the training program. And you go through rotational assignments, and typically those rotational assignments are kind of high visibility assignments where you're put in front of pretty critical tasks and challenges. And they want you to do kind of, at least 2 in the engineering, and they also encourage you to do a rotation outside of engineering. Maybe you go into business development or, something that's kind of out of your comfort zone, so you can kind of get that breadth of experience. And it really gives you an opportunity to have a very well-rounded experience. And I think for me personally, going through a rotational program like that, it really kind of helped me kind of find my niche in systems engineering, which, I wasn't, quite sure what I wanted to do in engineering. And I did a bunch of different jobs early in my career, and systems engineering just kind of found myself a home there. And, systems works with all different engineering disciplines. And I think that having that rotational background and seeing different aspects of the business really helps. And I think it kind of a nice stepping stone in someone's career to seek out those opportunities and apply for them.
Awesome. So we do have some questions coming through, which is great. So the first one is from Jack Holly. This question is directed towards Gerry. I'm in NROTC, and I was wondering if you could walk me through your journey from service in the military to eventually ending up in an aerospace company.
Yeah, hey Jack. Yeah, it kind of, the journey varies based on how long you're in the military. If you do your 4 or 5 year commitment and then separate and go in versus a 20+ year career and do it. I would say, from the way I did it was 25 years in the Air Force and then transferred over, and basically I was able to use my experience in this field, as well as leadership and things like that. But also I had contacts, over the 25 years, like others have said, it's a small community. And so whether you're transitioning from the military to a commercial space company, or from one commercial space company to another, or NASA, you make a lot of contacts along the way. And when you're ready to make a change, you reach out to those contacts. If you're separating as a more junior officer after 4 or 5 years, I'd say you're pretty attractive to many of the commercial companies, because in the military you're given a lot of responsibility early on. As a new grad, you're given a lot of responsibility, and so there's recognition there. So the 4 or 5 years of experience you have in the Navy, will be attractive to those commercial companies afterward. I can take it offline and give you more information. If you have more specifics, just IM me directly.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thank you.
Okay, our next question is from Henry Doucet, a general question to the whole panel. Oftentimes I hear that careers in the space industry started from a connection within the industry. How do you recommend finding connections in the field of your choice, other than, say, attending events like these and then following up afterwards, or messaging professionals on LinkedIn?
I'll take a shot at that. I would say events like this are a good stepping stone. Other opportunities are whether you participate in AIAA events, or even if you can go to engineering conferences. There's all sorts of various different ones. I participate at Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers every year. At any one of those conferences where there are multiple folks from industry, it's a good place to learn the art of networking, introducing yourself, talking to those folks, getting to know about them, and then getting more information from them later on as a follow-on for them to tell you more about their career, and then you can learn about them. If you do it well enough, you might then be able to make that connection with that person for some potential mentoring, and then those mentors are the ones who could very well help you on your path to either getting that first job, or once you're in your job, moving around. For the majority of my career, a lot of the really good opportunities that came to me at Boeing were because of the mentoring that I had received, and the contacts and networks that I had started to develop. So these events and reaching out through LinkedIn is a good way to get into that and start practicing the networking.
Awesome. So we also have another question for you, Carlos. This is from Devin. When you introduced yourself, you said you intentionally tried to make your career path lead to being an astronaut. Can you elaborate on what you did to achieve this, and what you would change if you could do it again?
Well, I'll go backwards on the question. If I could change it and do it over again, I would be born with better eyesight and not have motion sickness, so that I could actually be a military pilot, because that was the one thing that was on my to-do list that I was never able to actually do. I set out to, like I said in my intro, I set out to emulate the early astronauts. So the vast majority of astronauts from Mercury through Apollo were all military pilots, and they were all engineers. So I had a list of things that I needed to study. So I had to study engineering, I had to get into the military, I had to become a pilot. Once it became clear that I wasn't going to be able to become a pilot, then I went with the fallback option of, if I can't fly the ship, then I wanted to be participating in the engineering and development of the spacecraft, or even in mission control, running the missions. And so I kind of adjusted to emulate the pathway of, say, the mission control flight controllers. And I kind of went down that direction, and eventually found my way into Houston and on NASA. So jokingly, I would say I could do it over again. I could be a military pilot if I knew how to avoid the problem of the eyesight. But realistically, there's very little that I would actually change, other than I probably would have focused more on my studies. So I had a better GPA, and it would have led me more directly to where I wanted to get to. But otherwise, I think it all kind of worked out based on that drive and that focus of following a specific path.
If I could jump in on the back end of this question too, I'm actively working to try and be an astronaut. You know, that's still my end goal. And I ask this of crew members that I meet all the time. And the thing that I hear the most about, you know, when I ask them, you know, what did you do to become an astronaut and how can I do that? You know, now the crews are so diverse. They have backgrounds in science and engineering. Some of them are medical doctors and test pilots. You know, some of them are teachers, or in the past they have been. We haven't had a teacher in a little while. But they always tell you to do what you love and love what you do, because the odds of becoming an astronaut are very low. To put it into perspective, 12,000 people applied to the last call who were actually eligible and considered qualified. So they always say, you know, make sure you're doing what you love and you're not changing, you know, your path just to do the things you think are going to make you become an astronaut. Because if you do all those things, but you don't really love them and you don't get there, you may have some regrets. So, you know, keep that in mind too, because it's some really good advice.
Yeah, and so I was at the Naval Postgraduate School for a master's degree for 2 years, and two of my professors were astronauts Jim Newman and Dan Bursch, who were both multiple shuttle. One was a pilot, one was a mission specialist. Bursch was on the space station as well, and so there was a lot of my fellow students were applying through the program at the time. And some of the advice they gave was, again, goes to the extracurriculars, that, you know, that NASA astronauts as a whole tend to be scuba divers, skydivers, pilots, you know, so it's even private pilots, whether or not they were military pilots or not. It's those risk-taking, those calculated risk-taking things. It's things related to weightlessness, the ability to work underwater and not be, seasick, airsick, et cetera, are all positive attributes on your astronaut application. So just something to think about. But again, you know, to Sam's point, I don't think you want to go get your private pilot's license if you hate flying, or, you know, if you're afraid of sharks, you don't want to be scuba diving, et cetera. But do it if you love it.
I guess I have a question. I think this has come up kind of before. I guess, you know, the aerospace industry in general is not known for its diversity, but I know, you know, we're building upon that. So I guess if anyone can kind of comment on, you know, diversity in the space industry or in the aerospace industry in general, and kind of, you know, ways that we can, you know, I think the reason why I kind of had the idea for this panel was to try and boost the idea of making space accessible for everyone. So if anyone can kind of comment on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I can jump in on that. And I actually have the chat pulled up, and I saw a question from Maria about being a female in the industry as well. So that combines really nicely. Good job, Nick. You know, there's a lot of different types of diversity, especially in the aerospace industry. And we talk about it pretty often, especially in, you know, today's day and age. There's diversity between genders, there's diversity between, you know, nationalities and background. There's diversity between age, which is a big one in the aerospace industry at NASA. You know, there's multiple, I think there's like 4 or 5 generations working at the agency together right now, which is a really big one for us. So it's a big deal, and they're really paying attention to, you know, how they're hiring and the jobs they're putting people into. And it's getting a lot better. I, as a female in the industry, have had a really positive experience on the programs I work, especially commercial crew and Orion. I work with women every day, which wasn't necessarily how I started. You know, when I first came in 5 years ago, I was, you know, the youngest and the only woman in my group on center. And it was like that for a little while. And then all of a sudden I started working with more women. There were more people around my age. So it's getting better, not only from the private industry, or not only from the public industry, but from the private industry as well. Because when I work with Lockheed or Boeing or SpaceX, you know, they are even more diverse than we are because they're hiring so much and you're seeing so much activity. So it's definitely getting a lot better. And I've had mostly positive experience as a woman in aerospace. There are always going to be little challenges, but it's all about how you handle them and how you choose to carry yourself.
I also agree. I mean, I've been in the industry for 33 years, and there weren't many women when I first started 33 years ago. I mean, I might have worked with one woman, and the rest were all males. And now, like, I was on a project where there were like 5 or 6 women working together, and so, you know, definitely, you know, the progression over time. And I think companies also, you know, and this is kind of talking kind of later in your careers. I know you're all just graduating college, but like the different opportunities that companies have to have that work and family balance, which, you know, I took advantage of when I raised my kids, that I could work part-time and still keep my hand in my, you know, chosen career and be able to raise my family and just have that flexibility within work. And I found, you know, I had all men as bosses during that time, and they were very encouraging and open to that flexibility. And so I think there has been a huge shift in the workforce from a diversity standpoint, and, you know, just a lot of opportunities for you know, a much more improved work environment with that diversity.
I think one of the other things that's happened over the years is there's a lot more females who graduate in engineering. Villanova, I think now is 35% females. When I was at Villanova, it was 0% females because it wasn't co-ed. The university wasn't co-ed. But I know Dr. Gabriel had a goal to get it to 50%. And, you know, there's a lot more females available now, whereas in the old days, my early days, you know, it was all white males. That's what it was, because that's what was coming out of engineering school. So engineering graduates have changed, and the industry has changed along with it for the positive. I mean, the female engineers that I had working for me were among my best engineers, absolutely among the best engineers.
And I think too, the STEM programs that a lot of technical companies are investing in, you know, to get the interest, you know, in the younger, you know, elementary school and middle school and high school students, you know, getting them interested in math and science. You know, I think that that's been a huge push over the years. In fact, I remember when my kids were in preschool, like they did Space Day, and I was working at Lockheed Martin, and I would go in and we would have this whole big room set up with, you know, traveling, you know, to space with the kids. And I would talk about, you know, space and careers and rockets and do little experiments with them. And, you know, so even at the preschool level, like they were starting to, you know, show that there's an interest there to get, you know, women and young girls interested in the math and sciences.
But not just gender-based either. You know, there are a lot of cultural societies now that are supporting what may have in the past or may still be considered, minority engineering, where you have Hispanic engineers or the National Society of Black Engineers, and they're really active. I mean, even in the agency here at NASA, we have our own chapters, and they're really inclusive. I get to work with them on all kinds of stuff, and they work together with everybody. So, those societies are great too. There's definitely a lot of diversity from that perspective as well.
Moving on to another question that we have here from Henry. To Sam specifically, what challenges do you often see new hires struggling with at NASA? And being somewhat of a new hire yourself, can you touch on any challenges you've had to overcome as an engineer?
Yeah, that's a good question, Henry. I'm considered a young professional now. I guess new hires, they have like these rules for new hires, whatever. So they're calling me like a little bit old, but I'm not like that old yet. There are a couple challenges at the agency specifically that I see students have to kind of hurdle. It's very hard to get kind of cold hired at NASA, where you haven't had an internship and they kind of hire you from another company or right out of school. The agency is very big on internships. So a lot of the times they'll pull from their pools of interns, and that's somewhat of a challenge because if you're not an active student, you're not eligible for the internships. So that's something to keep in mind for some of you younger students while you have the opportunities. For some of the older students who maybe want to get involved in NASA and didn't, recognize that earlier on, they have recent graduate positions that you can look into as well. But another hurdle is when you're applying for those internships, especially the Pathways program, which is NASA's co-op program, which is one of the main pools that they hire from. There is a filter that you have to get past with your resume and your application prior to actually being seen by any of the hiring managers. So as a piece of advice for any of you who would be applying through the Pathways program, when you see that application and you read the description, if your resume lines up with the experience that they're looking for, try to choose some of the words that seem like keywords in those job descriptions to substitute for maybe the adjectives that you're using to describe your experience. For example, if you have a CAD background, computer design, and you can put that on your resume and they're specifically looking for, SolidWorks or Creo, and you have SolidWorks and Creo experience, don't just put CAD and assume that that's good enough. If they're using those descriptors and you have the experience, don't lie, but if you have the experience, use the descriptors that they're using to help bolster your resume and get you through that that filter process. I hope that answered the question.
One of the challenges I've seen the new hires struggle with is, and this is not necessarily on my team, of course, but is poor leadership and poor mentorship, right? And they, when I'm on a bunch of Reddit groups, Reddit communities for Ask Engineers and space engineers and things like that. And there's a lot of complaints about, I just got hired and my boss doesn't tell me what to do. My manager doesn't spend any time with me. He's too busy to do things. So, and then they lose confidence and then they struggle. So make sure that the companies that you're joining, the organizations you're joining, ask, who's going to be your manager? How are you going to be managed? How do they treat new hires? What kind of training programs do they do? Because you want to be in an organization and a company that knows how to treat new hires and knows how to train you and give you the confidence but yet the supervision that you're going to need in that, especially that first 12 to 18 months as a new hire. So that's kind of on you as a new hire to ask those questions. And if you find yourself in that situation with a bad manager, it's, again, go get help reach out or find a new situation.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I think one of the questions once you graduate, Villanova will email you asking how they did. They'll ask you for money too, but they'll ask you how they did. And you know, one of the questions they ask you is, how prepared did you feel? And Villanova does a really good job preparing their students for industry. But there's only so much that a university can do to prepare you for your specific job, because there is so much on the job training that comes with any specific engineering position. You know, they can't teach you how to build a spacesuit or, you know, how to build a launch pad. You know, not everybody would benefit from that. So they teach you, you know, a rock solid foundation to build on. And it's up to you and your company and your manager or your mentors to get you kind of the more specific information in how to do your specific job. And it comes from finding a good mentor and having a good manager, and, you know, coming to a company that has a good program in place. But it also comes from self-motivation to, you know, do the research and do the groundwork to build you up to be really good at whatever specific position you're hired into.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sam. I mean, I think one of the important things for everyone, even if your program doesn't have a formal mentorship program, is that when you start working, you know, look for people that you identify with, and, you know, look to that give you solid advice, both technically and personally, and kind of, you know, seek them out as mentors, because I think that's really important when you first start a new job, is, you know, kind of figuring out who are the people to go to, and don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't be afraid to make mistakes, because everybody does, and everybody goes through it. So never be afraid to speak up and to make mistakes. It's part of the learning experience. You'll never make it again, but it's part of the learning experience.
To close out here, I think we've answered all of the questions that have come in from our general audience, and we've sort of been touching on it already in our last few answers. Are there any final thoughts or words of advice that you would like to give our students who have been able to join us for this evening that you would just like to close out with?
Just thank you for the opportunity to speak to everyone, and I really enjoyed this. It's been a long time since I've done any college recruiting or anything like that, so this was a really nice experience, and thank you for including me.
I echo Tiffany's comments of, you know, this was really fun for me as well. And yeah, I just want to, like Sam mentioned, you know, if you get to your new company, or whether it's a geographic, you know, there's different clubs and organizations to join up into, you know, as a new hire, and maybe you're in a new location, new company, et cetera. Find those organizations and, you know, be part of it to seek out some of that, those kindred spirits. And again, there's some great Reddit communities too that are, you know, full of really helpful folks, whether it's in specific company Reddit pages or communities, or general engineering types. There's some great resources out there to answer questions and get advice. So keep seeking it out, and thank you.
All right. Well, unless Tallinn, Nick, you want to add something?
I was just going to say, you know, don't be afraid to go work what we used to call red programs, ones that are behind schedule or over budget, or you learn more on those kind of challenges or failing forward than you do anytime else. I'll take an engineer off a red program any day off of somebody who was just doing the same old job for 5 years. And I probably speak for the rest of the panelists. You know, hit us all up on LinkedIn. You know, if you want to slide into Tom or my DMs on Twitter. We're pretty active during basketball season, right, Tom?
Yes, absolutely.
I am not on Twitter, but I am on LinkedIn. So please feel free to follow me on LinkedIn or reach out. You know, I'm feel lucky that I have Villanova students, reach out pretty often. And I did the same thing to Tom where I cold called him. So please feel free to do the same to me. Just do what you love. There's a saying that says, if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. And, Tom said it to me and I agree, but I also think that if you do what you love, you'll never work harder because you love what you do. So you have a serious passion for it, and the long nights won't feel as long. So thank you guys. Thank you, Nick and Talene, for having me. It's been very fun. And I got to say, all the panelists, it's really interesting hearing about, what you guys are doing. And it's pretty cool for me to now be, on a panel myself. So thanks.
And I want to thank Sam because I have referred so many students to her and she never says no, including Nick, who she's kind of mentoring Nick now. So what I have found is students at Villanova don't understand how much alums want to help them. They don't understand that. I've helped some, and the comment that I get is, "Oh, I'm blown away by the fact that you're doing this." And almost all the alums will want to help. So as far as reaching out to us on LinkedIn or whatever, do it. Another is there's no substitute for hard work. Sam said it well. If you love your job, you don't mind working hard. Sam worked as hard as any student, more than any student that I ever worked with, to get where she is today. I mean, she sent out more than 100 resumes one time, and she never relented. And now, if you look where she is, it seems like it was easy. I used to tell employees, the road that got you to where you are, when you look back, looks like a super highway. But the road, when you were looking down it, was rutted and had lots of turns and rocks and all that challenges that you had to overcome. And I'm very proud of Sam because I personally saw her, doing all those things. So getting a mentor, and Villanova has formal mentor programs now in engineering, and I know the business school. Get involved with that. I think engineering doesn't even make it an option anymore. You have to have a mentor. But those are people who are volunteered to help students and to give back. I used to tell Sam when she was a student, you're going to get to give back, Sam, once you're out there. Now she's out there and she's giving back. So, and it happens fast. I mean, those 4 years just fly by. And then she said it perfectly, if you get a job you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And if you get a job and you find out you don't love it, change jobs, change companies, whatever, because you're going to be working a long time. And if you're miserable, you're going to be miserable for a long time. So yeah, I've really enjoyed participating in the panel. Thanks again for inviting me, and enjoyed hearing what all the other panelists.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you all to the panelists, everyone who showed up tonight. As you may have been seeing in the corner, we are recording. So if some people came on later, or I know some people couldn't make it tonight, we will be posting it. Possibly we'll get the Villanova Media Services to have it maybe on their YouTube channel, which would be really cool. If anyone has any further questions or wants to connect with any of the panelists, you could either, obviously, as they were saying, hit up their DMs or LinkedIn's, or you could also go through us, either me at mflory@villanova.edu or Talene at tpastian@villanova.edu. And yeah, I mean, this is just great. We're bringing space back to Villanova, so this is just a great way to kind of start off the trends to finals and then winter break. So I just want to thank everyone again, and also Dr. Nersasov, if you want to close things out.
Well, I just want to again thank all the panelists. I think opportunities like that don't come very often when you have a chance to interact with somebody who has been involved with the most recent launches, as well as somebody who's been involved with Apollo 11 program. So it's been, I think, an invaluable experience for all the students. And I think the testament of that was the fact that we had over 120 students involved into this discussion. Just to give you a comparison point, when we need to gather a focus group, I can barely collect 10 to 12 students. So you know, you have 10 times more than that. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. I know it's been 2 hours of your evening, but thank you for your perspectives. I'm sure it's been very valuable to all of the participants. Thank you very much. And I'll make sure I'll connect with all of you through LinkedIn.
Thank you.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. I think that's it. We can hop off if you need.
Yeah.